Not so long ago, there was a discussion on Reddit where a tinfoil hat theory came up about Magic Arena's matchmaking allegedly choosing opponents with decks that are very strong against the type you're playing if you're doing too well using the same deck. While most players in the thread mocked the idea, some of the Redditors described their weird anecdotal experiences, suggesting that there might be something fishy with the ranked matchmaking system. For example, getting a lot of control decks as opponents while playing monoblack midrange, but after switching to a fast aggro deck, they stopped coming. Some players even went on to speculate what caused a sudden change in their opponent deck trend. Too many matches played with the same deck? Or getting a certain weird streak? A very valid question came up. If this was more than just a tinfoil hat theory without any evidence, what would a system like that serve for? Trolling players, ruining their win streaks for the kicks, or perhaps to punish using the same deck so that they craft new ones? Anyway, this theory was kind of easy to disprove. All it takes is write down data of enough matches played with the same deck, then compare it with the same amount of data played with different decks. This is why I've decided to do a study where I play 100 matches in ranked with the same deck. My choice went with a deck that's very different to what I usually play, so I went with the infamous bant toxic deck. While the changes I made to the spells were cosmetic, I did mess up the lands profoundly, thinking that adding basics instead of crafting the double lands I was missing wouldn't make that much of a difference. That assumption turned out to be false. This deck was the deck I used for the first 100 matches. Then, this is the deck I used for the next 100 matches. A monoblack midrange. Afterwards, I played 100 consecutive matches with this monored aggro deck. Let's check how it went. Let's analyze 100 matches played consecutively with the same deck in best of 1 ranked. For this study, I've played 100 consecutive ranked matches in Mythic with 3 very different decks, so 300 matches total. I feel like this is enough to form an unbiased opinion that goes beyond anecdotal evidence. For the analysis, I provided the opponent decks in 4 categories to simplify things. Aggro, all the decks that intend to do a lot of damage as fast as possible. Proper decks that control, so rely on counter spells, removals, and board wipes a lot. That would be the proper control decks listed here as control. Mid-range would be the smaller control decks that are slower and rely on big mana spells, so generally any deck that falls between aggro and control, just to simplify things like I said, including quickie decks and dinos as well. Unknown would be the decks I didn't get a chance to identify, for example they scooped before playing anything. I also put the deck theme at the bottom of the screen for anyone who is interested in that as they go. One thing that surprised me over this experiment is the amount of different decks I would be matched against in Mythic rank. And you probably read so much about tryhards using the same deck over and over, and in Mythic rank they would be like 4 decks. But no, in these 100 matches I faced a variety of different decks. I did another 100 matches and still there was variety, and I did 300 matches in this experiment total, and I faced a variety of different decks for each of the decks I was using. Even monored aggro had different variants, which made the opponents very fun to compete against. And speaking of monored, this was the deck I expected to be my toxic aggro's kryptonite, but it turns out that Skrell's Hive adequately shifted the scales against them with that lifelink at 3 poison counters. Another cool thing about facing monored aggro decks was that they didn't block, and few first rounds it was just like attacking me. After that, they felt like they were in trouble, so they decided to start blocking and lost the game basically because lifelink comes up if they don't block toxic creatures. The decks that turned out to be very strong against mine were the Picnic Ruiner, Illuminator, Virtuoso, Cacophony Scam, Double Strike aggros, but because in many cases I underestimated how much damage they can deal with a single creature in one turn, also because I lacked removal. Oh yes, removal. This is what made me realize how badly I butchered the lands and that missing blue mana to cast some essential board control spells would become an issue more often than I've imagined. But the study was already going, and modifying the deck by adding the much needed comes into play tapped unless 2 or fewer lands would break its integrity, so I decided to go with the deck. It's not that I was getting mana hosts regularly, but I feel like a few matches I've lost might have gone to my favor instead if I had drawn the right lands. Still, the deck proved to be solid and quite versatile. The overall win rate ended up being on my side, with more matches won than lost. And we're getting to that part of the video where some of these tinfoil hat theorists start getting goosebumps, and not from the electromagnetic fields this time. Apparently we didn't get that many control decks, meaning the type we should have a major advantage over. But before we start typing those I knew it comments, let's address that this is Mythic rank level of best of 1. How can we tell if the reason for control decks being such a small minority isn't simply because they're not competitive enough in the aggro meta? Quite simply, after playing 100 matches with the toxic aggro deck, I proceeded to play 100 matches with a monoblack midrange deck. This is the exact opposite when facing controlled decks as my opponents, since a controlled deck is the worst deck type to go against as monoblack midrange. That would make the controlled decks show up in large numbers if the tinfoil hatters were right? It turns out that they weren't though. Here's a comparison of how many of each type I got playing the next 100 matches with a monoblack midrange deck. Here's another one for monored aggro. In conclusion, there's no ground or reason to think that you get decks you don't like or are strong against yours because you are using the same deck too much. The reason might be that a YouTuber or streamer played a specific deck recently. Also, there are very different trends on different ranks, so you might have experienced something as you progress that changed abruptly with the rank up. There's also the factor of long games that you've lost or a losing streak having a huge impact on you. You perceive things where you think that you're getting a lot of these decks as opponents, even though you played 20 or more matches that day and only a small percentage of them were the decks you hate going up against. I've also kept track of which player got the first turn in these games, and it turns out that I actually got more matches on the play than on the draw with the toxic deck. It was my turn first in 55 of them, so 55% of the games where I was the player starting first, and I played second in 45 only. Interestingly, during the 100 matches with monoblack midrange, I had a streak of 10 games where I was on the draw. Strangely, it was 10 games in a row. No reason to undust that tinfoil hat though, because the overall result was 47 on the play and 53 on the draw with the monoblack midrange, and exactly the same, 47 on the play and 53 on the draw with monored later. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this video helpful, be sure to hit the like button. Catch you in another one, bye.